Hi, I'm Kaylee, and if you're new here, so am I. Welcome to my podcast, Pondering Profusely. Through this channel, I'll be finding the why behind feelings, fears, and questions that I've experienced while going through a major transition in my life. I'll be documenting my findings and thoughts in these episodes, and if it speaks to you, I would love to have you along for the journey. I feel like there is so many times in the world that you can feel extremely disconnected from it, whether it's through, your mobile technology or if you're living alone, sometimes isolation can kind of take a toll on you. I really want to fall in love with the world again. Topics that I really want to be passionate about delivering to my audience. So there are some things you should know first. I can't promise that these episodes will always have an overarching theme. Other than that, I'm interested in it, and it's something that I relate to and an experience that I have gone through recently or something that I want to learn more about. But I believe in order for material to be worth hearing, it has to be coming from someone who is truly passionate about that topic. And that is what I can promise you. Every topic that I dive into is something that I made the decision to want to explore further and find the truths behind some questions I need to help make sense of logically or philosophically or spiritually. Bottom line, I promise you my authenticity. I want to ensure that the time you're giving me is worth it and coming from a person who also cares. So whether you're going through a similar phase of your life or you're just curious and looking to know more about the world, join me. Let's get into the first topic, which is boredom. Boredom feels like such a simple concept, but there's so many layers to its history, effects, and what it can produce. I'm starting off with this topic first because I'm hoping, as much as it helps anyone out there who's listening, it also helps me. Not only in my life, but with creating this podcast, this channel, this series, because I know that sticking with this will get tedious and boring, and I won't want to do it some days, but those feelings are completely normal. And when you're working on a passion, the pursuit is the most important part, and persevering through those difficult moments is what will truly set you apart from anyone who has that idea to start off with. So you can't let those feelings prevent you from achieving your goals. And as someone who can be quick to abandon a project or have this big idea and then not follow through with it, learning about this topic will help to hopefully push through those difficult parts that I may struggle with creating this series. So hopefully I can look back on these episodes and even for myself, just remember in those times the benefits of boredom, what it can yield. So I can feel it, accept it, and more importantly, push through it. I want to go into some kind of thoughts that I initially had when thinking about this emotion, because I find that it is a emotion that's often vilified in our society. It's something that you quickly want to eliminate or completely change out of that state however possible. Boredom can be found in work, in everyday life, sitting in traffic, going from point A to point B. And I would often say that there are so many vices out there to kind of subside the emotion that a lot of people go towards fulfilling that by, doom scrolling or online shopping or binge watching a show. There are so many ways that you can really entertain yourself and not have to really sit in that uncomfortableness. And look, I get it. It's not something that you can easily give up. I know it's not something that I want to easily give up. especially when it's so accessible. I mean, everyone has their phone, and without having to use your brain, you can easily remove that feeling or that emotion. Even if you try to quit, it's not as easy as, going on a diet, because your phone will always be with you, and that is so accessible in your pocket all the time. I mean, I don't know about you, but ultimately when I'm bored, I consume, I eat, I watch, I buy, but I want to shift this mentality to when I'm bored, I create something, I set a new goal, or I do something action-wise. I think that'll be a lot more, not only stimulating, but something that I'll be proud of and something that I can look back on, like this series. I also want to start off with definition of dopamine, because I think it's often misused or overextended to different feelings or chemicals that we produce when it's not necessarily dopamine. In the article, Why You Feel Stuck and What You Can Do About It, Shivam Arora defines dopamine as this. Dopamine is often mislabeled as the pleasure chemical, and it's easy to see why. When we expect a set of expectations to yield success in our pursuit of pleasure, the release of dopamine helps us stay on course and undertake and repeat these actions. Reinforcement learning in humans. However, the pursuit of something cannot be equated to its enjoyment. And since dopamine is not associated with the actual enjoyment of the reward or pleasure, that is the role of serotonin, its characterization as a pleasure chemical is not accurate. Simply put, dopamine helps us engage in reward or pleasure-seeking behaviors, but does not leave us feeling satiated when we get what we sought. It's a really interesting quote because I think it brings reason to why when you have engaged in some sort of mindless activity to keep yourself entertained, you leave feeling nothingness or feeling unsatisfactory. It also is a really good reason to want to pursue activities that engage more than just producing dopamine. Dopamine is not associated with the actual enjoyment or reward or pleasure. That's the role of serotonin. And serotonin is a lot more hard to come by. Maybe it's a chemical that I'll get into more with this series because it is something that kind of interests me. I am constantly striving to find ways to feel engaged but also productive. I also wanted to put this in terms of a gambling explanation because I thought that was fitting with how we can explain what kind of dopamine or how much dopamine you will yield from a certain situation. When a feeling is expected, it decreases the level of dopamine sent to your brain and that rewarding feeling you receive. Similar to how, in gambling, the less risk there is to bet and expect something, the lower the yield or reward will be. When you open a TikTok app or a video scrolling app, your brain is already trained to know that no matter what the dopamine yield is, there will be some, and therefore you get less out of that, whether that's the reward or the feeling or excitement that your brain will receive from that content or entertainment that you're consuming. Next, I want to start off with the evolution standpoint of how boredom came to be. Peter Toohey, in his book, Boredom, A Lively History, dives into this concept a little bit further. Boredom started off as an early warning signal to indicate to our body that the situation we were in was potentially dangerous or psychologically harmful. He quotes, "Just as emotion like disgust can protect you from eating toxic food, so can boredom protect you from toxic social circumstances." While I think that it's a little dramatic of a statement to say that boredom protects you from potentially psychologically harmful situations. Most of the time, it's not a psychologically harmful situation, but it does explain why we want to escape the feeling of boredom so quickly. Overall, we can agree that it is an uncomfortable feeling, and in society where we are so used to comfort, with so many options to dissipate the boredom, it makes sense why no one would actively want to endure it. To sum it up, it's not our fault that we're always looking for that next hit of dopamine. Our brains are just built that way. A misconception that I think a lot of people have is that the opposite state of boredom is being excited. However, digging into the science behind this more, I learned that the connection from boredom is actually creativity. In her book, Bored and Brilliant, Manoush Zomorodi highlights the importance of originality and how boredom helps us achieve it. She states, boredom is the gateway to mind wandering, which helps our brains create those new connections that can solve anything from planning a dinner to a breakthrough in combating global warming. When I originally read this statement, it rang so true to me. I don't know about you guys, but I actually remember as a kid, there would be times, especially in the summer, where I would constantly need to find ways to entertain myself that didn't involve television or internet. Though it was kind of a difficult task for me at first, it was in that state of boredom that I actually found myself to be the most creative. We wrote plays, we created fashion shows, came up with storylines, turned ourselves into superhero spies, but that motivation to originally create or imagine would not have existed without that initial feeling of boredom. Manoush Zomorodi also writes this in her book that I thought was a really great takeaway and might help with your concept or comprehension of boredom. We may feel like we are doing very little when we endlessly fold laundry, but our brains are actually hard at work. When our minds wander, we activate something called the default mode, the mental place where we solve problems and generate our best ideas, and engage in what's known as autobiographical planning, which is how we make sense of our world and our lives and set future goals. The default mode is also involved in how we try to understand and empathize with other people and make moral judgments. When we let ourselves space out and our minds wander, we do our most original thinking and problem solving. Without distraction, your mind can go into some really interesting and unexpected places. Creativity, no matter how you define it, needs a push. And boredom, which allows new different connections to form in our brain, is the most effective muse. Mind wandering is a really healthy thing for your brain to do and will actually yield to some really positive outcomes. So it's something that I know I'm going to try to do more of. Pamela Paul also agrees with this connection of creativity when it comes to boredom. Once you've truly settled into the anestheticizing effects of boredom, you find yourself en route to discovery. With monotony, small differences begin to emerge. Between those trees, those sweaters, this is why so many useful ideas occur in the shower, when you're held captive to mundane activity. Let your mind wander and follow where it goes. From her article, Let Children Be Bored Again. It's so important that in that state of boredom that you do let yourself kind of wander. More importantly, give your brain a break. So what have we learned so far? There is a connection between boredom and creativity. It's important to let your mind wander because it can lead to your next big breakthrough, or it can lead to you stimulating your use of imagination and utilizing that creativity that might be buried underneath and could yield to a bigger idea, maybe a new direction in your life, or a new discovery about yourself that you wouldn't have known had you not had that opportunity to really sit there and take that quiet time for yourself. After learning more about the benefits and what boredom can lead to, perhaps you'll actively try to create boring scenarios too. At this point, we've explored the first initial feeling of boredom, which I would define as not having anything to do. But there is another type of boredom, which Dr. Sandi Mann defines this. Boredom stems from a situation where none of the possible things that a person can realistically do appeal to the person in question. This renders the person inactive and generally unhappy. Thus, boredom is the result of having nothing to do that no one likes, rather than having nothing to do per se. So this is another type of boredom, which essentially means you are stuck in this mundane activity, and though you do have something to do, you do not find that task particularly engaging, which I think lots of people can relate to that feeling as well. And I'm sure you have experienced multiple different forms of boredom, like the ones defined. There was also actually a study conducted to understand the correlation between creativity and boredom. That was carried out by Dr. Sandi Mann. She originally started off with giving these contestants a phone book and telling them to essentially copy the numbers from that phone book into another place. Hence, a very boring activity. It lasted for about an hour, and then after that task, she gave them a creative one. Basically giving them a box and asking them to create as many possible creative uses for that box that they could. And this is what she pulls from her research. The findings have implications for the way that boredom is viewed, both by society at large and by communities such as within the work or education spheres. Until recently, boredom has been viewed as a negative emotion, with only negative outcomes. But the current study adds weight to the evidence that suggests that boredom can sometimes be a force for good. This means that it might be a worthwhile enterprise to allow or even embrace boredom in work, education, and leisure. On an individual basis, if one is trying to solve a problem or come up with creative solutions, the findings for the current study suggest that undertaking a boring task, especially reading tasks, might help with coming up with a more creative outcome. So, next time you have a boring work task, pull out something that you probably wouldn't, or something that you would try to avoid, and something may come to you, or at least that's what science suggests. So far, I've only shared the benefits of short-term boredom. There is another type of boredom that Toohey refers to in his novel, and that is chronic boredom. It's a similar feeling to the first, however, there is no end in sight, and this is actually a pretty potentially dangerous feeling. So if it is something that you feel that you are experiencing, it's important to seek help. A person who is experiencing it is led down a very dark spiral, leading to agitation, depression, self-harm, etc. You get the drift. There is a level of boredom that is not healthy, and it's important that you only focus on healthy boredom, because there is no benefits that will yield from this chronic boredom. So now we've covered a few different variations of boredom, what each can lead to, and the effects. I want to summarize what we can utilize from boredom. One is to boost your creativity. Instead of numbing the downtime with entertainment, lean into the boredom. Great ideas often start there. Use it as a check-in. Recognize when you're stuck in a pattern that's no longer serving you. Boredom flags that. Balance is key. Embrace short-term boredom, but be mindful of chronic boredom. It can lead to deeper issues. And ultimately, live intentionally. Choose tasks, routines tied to purposes. Even boredom differs when it's meaningful. Those are kind of the 4 takeaways from boredom. Lastly, I wanted to get into Manoush's Bored and Brilliant program. I'm sure you can find tons of ways to stimulate that feeling of boredom. So take this one with a grain of salt, but if you are looking for inspiration or you want to try new things in your life to see what kind of results it yields, you can follow these 7 steps. So the first challenge is to observe yourself. First, you'll track your digital habits, which most likely will shock you when you discover it. Challenge 2. Keep your devices out of reach while in motion. Keep your devices out of sight when you're in transit, so no walking and texting, or taking the subway and taking out your phone. That one might be tricky. Challenge 3. Photo-free day. That means not taking a single picture. I know that will probably be a lot easier for most people because I don't think most people are taking photos every single day. Challenge 4, delete that app. You know which one. Challenge 5, observe something else. Reclaim the art of nothing. So whether that's going for a stroll in the park and watching how a tree blows in the wind, or maybe you see a kid opening the door for an elderly person. Try to take in your environment around you. In combination of all these exercises, you'll use your new powers of boredom to make sense of your life and set goals. Here are my last thoughts and notes for this episode. I wanted to share my own perspective on the preliminary findings I read about and researched for this week, as I actively tried to seek boredom. Allowing myself to be in those moments of quiet or under stimulation really allowed a ton of ideas or thoughts to pop into my brain. But the way that I made them stick was writing them down. Since conducting this experiment, it's allowed me to stay a lot more in tune with my mind and how it's feeling, documenting those thoughts. We've talked about evolution of boredom, the different kind of boredoms that you can face, what kind of benefits it can yield, and how you can stimulate that in your everyday life. But I think there is a last step that isn't talked about, and that is actually utilizing those thoughts that you have. The only way for that imagination to really be useful is to take action on it. So when you do have that idea, don't just disregard it. Write it down. Even if you think it's dumb or you think that it could never lead to anything, you never know. You might look back on it and be like, hey, this was actually not a bad thing, or this could now really help me in my current situation or struggle that I'm facing. I think it's so important to treat your thoughts as rare and special, because you never know when you'll have that particular one again. Maybe ever. You never know where it could lead. That is all for me and my exploration on boredom this week. I hope you really enjoyed this episode, and I hope you stuck around for more. Okay, bye.